Thank you for joining us for today's SBIRT for Youth Learning Community, Mastering SBIRT Skills Using Virtual Patients, a Next Generation Approach, featuring Cyril Adam. We're going to be beginning momentarily. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you all to the SBIRT for Youth Learning Community, Mastering SBIRT Skills Using Virtual Patients, a Next Generation Approach, featuring Cyril Adam. At this time, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items for today's webinar. First, we'd like to encourage all participants to actively engage in today's webinar through the questions box or the chat box. If at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties, you can also use both of these methods to communicate with the organizers. You're also able to collapse and expand the GoToWebinar panel via the arrow button should you choose. At this time, I'd like to go over a couple of poll questions. We'd like to get a picture of the demographics and SBIRT experience of the audience. These questions will appear on the screen as an interactive poll. Please select the best answer as it applies to you. Our first question is, what is your current professional role? Are you a counselor, therapist, social worker, or case manager? Are you a nurse, nurse practitioner, physician, or physician assistant? Are you a program or unit manager, a university student or faculty, or other? And if you select other, feel free to let us know what current professional role you have via the questions box or the chat box. You can see a couple of answers coming in for other, for clinical trainer, OWI assessor, project coordinator, an SBIRT network coordinator, and SBIRT trainer. So thank you. I want to thank you all for participating. I'm just going to share the results of the whole poll here. It looks like the majority of our audience does work as either a counselor, therapist, social worker, or case manager at 40%. 29% did select other, 17% a program or unit manager, and 6% as a nurse, nurse practitioner, physician, or physician assistant, and 8% as a university student or faculty. For our second question, what field do you represent? Mental health, addictions, physical health, education, or EAP? And again, if none of those apply to you, feel free to let us know what field you represent in the questions box or the chat box. Okay, great. I want to thank everyone for participating in that poll. I'm going to share the results. Looks like the majority of our audience represents the addictions field at 42%, 28% in education, 20% in mental health, and 10% in physical health. And again, if none of those apply to you, feel free to let us know in the questions box. And for our third question, do you conduct SBIRT interventions? Okay, great. I want to thank everyone for participating there. I'm going to share those results with you. Looks like the majority of our audience has selected no at 71%, saying they do not currently conduct SBIRT interventions. And for our last question, do you see your agency using SBIRT? Okay, great. Thank you for all your participation. I'm going to share those last results with you. Looks like the majority of our audience does see their agency using SBIRT at 92%. Okay, now at this time I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the National SBIRT ATTC. We're funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and we offer a suite of services that you can find on our website. Some of these services include our National Registry of Qualified SBIRT Trainers. We offer monthly live webinar series on a variety of SBIRT topics, as well as have a library of free recorded webinars that can be accessed from our website. We offer technical assistance and consultation at request, and our website also hosts many online resources such as downloadable products that are easy to use. You can also sign up for the SBIRT Alert, our electronic newsletter, to receive training and webinar announcements, as well as additional SBIRT information. And lastly, the I Read a Blog, hosted through our parent organization, offers stories of SBIRT in the real world. All of these, as well as additional resources, can be found on our website. I'd also like to mention our free self-paced online SBIRT for Adolescents course. This course is based on a webinar presented by Dr. Sharon Levy on the application of SBIRT with adolescents. It is hosted on our website and is approved for continuing education credits. Some of the goals of this learning community are to examine the application of SBIRT in a variety of youth settings. We want to create a community of providers who have a similar interest in implementing SBIRT for youth, as well as facilitate the sharing of experiences with implementing SBIRT in youth settings. So finally, we'd like to encourage you all to come back to some of our upcoming sessions, which will be announced in the next couple of weeks. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Cyril Adam brings 10 years of experience in instructional theory, design, and research to Cognito's health and wellness applications. As Senior Director for Health Programs, Cyril manages the development of virtual patient simulations for health professionals and students. Prior to joining Cognito, Cyril developed health and technology projects at the Columbia Center for New Media Teaching and Learning. Cyril is working on his education doctorate in learning technology designs at Columbia University and is an avid cyclist and runner. Now, Cyril, if you're ready, I can turn things over to you.
Sure thing. Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
I can. And we can see your screen. You're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to IRETA and the National SBIRT ATTC for hosting Cognito this afternoon. We're delighted to share some of the work we've been doing around the field of SBIRT. What I would like to cover today are going to go over a brief overview of Cognito and what we do, and then talk about some of the gaps and challenges in SBIRT education, which we hope to address with the simulations that I'll present to you today, and particularly SBI with adolescents, which is a very cool tool for health professionals to learn how to conduct SBIRT with adolescents. And we'll talk a little bit about where this field is going and where these training tools can be applied in the future. And we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. Cognito is a simulation company based in New York City and that provides simulations that aim to change attitudes and behaviors. These simulations are available online, on demand, 24/7, and are addressed to a variety of settings. And many of these settings are settings in which SBIRT has and should be applied, such as hospitals, community or faith-based organizations, educational settings, workplaces, primary care, schools. Our conversation simulations are meant to be scalable tools that provide you with an immersive educational experience where you have a lot of control over the experience, and these simulations are heavily researched and informed by best practices which help drive measurable outcomes. Now, the field in which we try to apply our technology over these past 2 years has been to the field of SBIRT education. There is very good evidence that SBI works and that it should be implemented in primary care, college campuses, school-based health centers, and a whole variety of settings. And yet education on substance use is often optional or specialized for health professionals. Substance use is taught in specialized health courses, and it's usually geared towards substance use disorders or addiction. It doesn't really cover the broad spectrum of substance use. It really focuses on treatment and not so much on prevention, not so much on integrating behavioral health with all patients, with all clients, wherever we see them. We have also seen a slow adoption among professionals. A survey of AAP-affiliated pediatricians showed that less than half routinely screened adolescents for substance use as part of routine care. And then the famous T's that are mentioned by professionals, the time, training, treatment resources that they find unavailable. And so our current project has sought to integrate substance use education in professional and academic settings. And I'm going to give you a very brief overview of this project, which Dr. McPherson covered on another webinar some weeks ago. Our project assembled some of the biggest stakeholders and high-profile organizations involved in the dissemination of SBIRT in health professional settings. NORC at the University of Chicago, a large independent research organization, partnered with us to propose to the Conrad Hilton Foundation to disseminate substance use education in schools of nursing and social work nationwide. And the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, the Council on Social Work Education, and the Center for Clinical Social Work have brought us wonderful support in terms of informing the content and the dissemination of these tools. So the tool was really, the goal was really to engage these main national associations and experts and practitioners, the ones who would use this simulation, including faculty and students in over 70 schools of social work and nursing nationwide. And the goal was to develop an adolescent SBIRT curricula and instructor's toolkit, which NORC recently released. And I encourage you to reach out to them to request that toolkit if you haven't seen it. And Cognito has developed and implemented a virtual patient simulation. The first goal is really to offer deliberate practice in screening and brief intervention skills. And I'm going to mention this several times over the course of this webinar. Offering deliberate practice in those screening and brief intervention skills is absolutely key to what we're trying to do as SBIRT implementers. We also try to provide a scalable, standardized training and assessment solution to the field. The standardization of training has been a concern. We hear that there are many different ways to do training, indeed many different needs for training depending on the setting and the learner population. And also in terms of assessment, the assessment of students' competencies or professionals' competencies in conducting screening and brief intervention often relies on the face-to-face intervention of interactions with standardized patients or peers, which can make the assessment a little bit difficult and sometimes uncomfortable for the person being tested. And so this simulation, as you'll see, addresses that. And finally, the project also provided stipends to the participating schools to evaluate the simulation's effectiveness within a randomized control trial, which NORC and Cognito are currently running in those schools of nursing and social work. So again, the research very important to us, and determining that this simulation is efficacious is one of our first objectives. About the simulation itself, SBI with adolescents. The way the simulation was developed was through an iterative process with partners. This involved an ongoing consultation with subject matter experts and end users throughout the process. We really gathered some of the brightest minds in the country around the field of substance use and screening and brief intervention, as well as the end users, the faculty, the students who would use this simulation. And we go through an iterative development process where all of those stakeholders will provide feedback on every deliverable within the project. We also support research through automated surveys and user behavior data, which we collect as part of the dissemination of these simulations. And finally, Cognito simulations are the only ones listed on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, which is not only something that we're very proud of, but something that is very essential to many implementers who are looking for evidence-based programs. And so you can see here the flow of our development process, which involves a design phase where we conduct an extensive needs analysis, trying to understand what are the skills gaps out there, who are the learners, what are the skills that we need them to have, not only that the faculty need them to have, but also the future employers. So within this process, we do a lot of research, a lot of consultation with subject matter experts to come up with a development plan, what we call an instructional design plan, which outlines the educational experience and really the way the learners are going to learn about those key elements of screening and brief intervention. Then we deliver the simulation in implementation settings, and these simulations are hosted on Cognito servers. Very, very easy to disseminate in your setting. And as I mentioned, there is an analytics component where we collect a lot of data that will enable us and clients and implementers to determine the efficacy of the program. So this is the menu that greets users once they access the simulation. You can see starting at the top that they first receive a brief introduction from the virtual coach. We have our virtual in-house coach here at Cognito called Jackie Torres, who helps guide users through these simulations. So Jackie first gives us an introduction about the importance of SBIRT, why adolescent substance use is a concern, and what we can do to help prevent or curb adolescent substance use. Learners then are able to engage in really interactive, fun activities about screening and brief intervention, some of which I will show you in a minute. And then the key component of these simulations is the deliberate practice component, where learners are able to engage in conversations in brief interventions with several virtual adolescents to put their brief interventions to the test. As you'll see in a few minutes, within these conversations, learners are challenged to use the right motivational interviewing techniques, the right conversation framework in order to collect the right information and eventually motivate the adolescent to implement positive changes. To the right, you can see that at the end, learners will receive a scoring dashboard, which will show them their level of performance in the final conversation. And they will also have access to additional materials and resources, which can include screening tools, brief intervention models, tips and techniques, as well as any information that each client wants to include. So if you wanted to include information for local referrals, for example, that is something that can be added. As we just saw, this features very engaging didactic modules on SBIRT, motivational interviewing, and the brief negotiated interview model. And the simulation also provides deliberate practice in conversation with virtual adolescents. And this is really a key feature. So let me talk about this for just 1 minute. Deliberate practice is absolutely key in learning communication skills. Just like you learn to ride a bicycle through deliberate practice, you need to learn communication skills by practicing them. It is not something that you can learn by watching a video or clicking through a PowerPoint. And in fact, most of us learn to ride a bike with what in instructional terms we call scaffolding, which may be the training wheels, for example, that provide a little bit of support when we're first starting to learn. We also receive a lot of support from our coaches, who often are our parents or older siblings, helping us along the way and giving us a lot of feedback on what we are doing well and what we can do better. And then over time, through this deliberate practice, we learn to find our balance, and eventually we can take the training wheels off and put ourselves in more of a testing condition where we will try to go ahead and ride our bike, or in this case conduct screening and brief intervention without help. So this is meant to be a very scaffolded experience that can help a novice as well as an experienced professional learn the basics of SBIRT and practice them in a way that is very effective and will provide them with the right feedback so that they can continue to improve their performance. One of the ways in which we do that, as you can see in the third bullet here, is through an undo button, which is something very cool and that we all wish we could do in real-life conversations when we say something we wish we hadn't, is to click undo and go back in time and get to try again. And this is one of the reasons why this format is much more comfortable for students and professionals than in-person role play, especially for novices who are really put on the spot when they are asked to role play in front of their peers. They get very focused on saying the right thing or not offended the peer or the standardized patient, instead of really exploring freely and trying things out, trying what works or doesn't, and getting feedback from the coach and the virtual patient. This type of training is also very scalable. It is very easy to implement. These simulations are hosted by Cognito. All you have to do is to send a link and an activation code to the users. And finally, going over a few of the features, as I mentioned, the simulation does include a competency assessment, which replicates evidence-based observation tools that are used in the field to observe students in face-to-face conditions. The simulation is available 24/7 from any computer connected to the internet. Students receive a certificate of completion, and the simulation does carry continuing education credits for social workers and nurses, and credits for medical professionals are currently pending. So going through the learning experience, users first go through a really engaging activity about screening and the importance of using validated measures in screening patients. What we heard during our needs analysis is that a lot of even experienced professionals can sometimes veer away from the validated questions and recognized screening tools and kind of ask their own questions or ask variations on the validated questions, which constitutes a big risk in terms of the information that is collected and its accuracy. So here on your screen you can see an example that we heard again and again, that providers will ask patients questions like, "You don't drink, do you?" And make a certain assumption about their patient. It may be someone that they have known for a while and they want to think the best of them. And it's very easy to fall into this kind of interaction with the patient. And so here learners are challenged to choose the right validated questions and to see how the patient responds. So this really impresses upon them how differently a patient might respond based on how you ask the question. Something else I want to touch on here is that you can see we use virtual characters. We don't use video actors. We design virtual patients, which carry a number of benefits, one of which is that these are obviously synthetic characters. There is no fear on the part of the user that either of these characters is going to be hurt in any way by what's going on. And a great benefit of that is that, again, it helps encourage experimentation on the part of the user. Again, coming from the point of view that this is not a patient that they can harm. This is a completely safe environment for them to practice screening and brief intervention. So once they have learned about the basics of screening, learners go into a clinical decisions module where they learn how different screening results can help place patients in different risk categories. And based on that, we'll be able to define what the right approach for this patient is. So this simulation covers all levels of risk from no use at all to high-risk use and a potential referral to treatment services. Again, in clinical decisions, users are presented with snippets of scenarios before they enter each practice conversation and are asked to make the right clinical decision for each of those patients. So here you can see a case example that is actually not in this simulation. Sarah is a 17-year-old senior. Her screening results showed alcohol use once or twice in the last year, so she is low risk. What should we do? We can engage in a brief intervention and referral. We can give an affirmation for not drinking much and brief advice to abstain. We can explain that we have to bring in her parents, or we can continue the appointment without addressing the positive screen. And here you can see the correct choice was the second one, and the learner could not move on without having made that choice. Learners also go through some engaging activities about motivational interviewing techniques and learn how to use open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We really try to get at the core competencies that are needed in motivational interviewing. Again, this is not a two-day course in motivational interviewing provided by the network of trainers. This is meant to be a module that provides enough skill and confidence to the practitioner so that they can immediately start screening patients and providing those brief interventions as effectively as they can. So this module really puts the accent on the ores of motivational interviewing, these basics of the technique, and puts the accent on eliciting, providing, and eliciting information. So really emphasizing the key components that can help bring out the spirit of motivational interviewing, of empathy and collaboration. They learn to implement these motivational interviewing techniques through the brief negotiated interview steps. So here, if you're familiar with the model, these steps probably look familiar, where first we will build rapport with the patient, then elicit pros and cons with the patients. This is, if you're familiar with the latest edition of motivational interviewing, there is a little bit of debate about the pros and cons, and the newer edition of the motivational interviewing manual no longer recommends discussing pros with adults. However, with adolescents, our subject matter experts really felt that it's very important to talk about what substance use does for them, how does it make them feel, what problem might it address for them in a way, just to build that empathy, to build that connection with adolescents who often feel that adults are judging them and are missing opportunities to connect with their experience. So we will address the pros and cons with these adolescents, then provide feedback, assess their readiness using the readiness ruler. We'll then negotiate an action plan with the team and summarize and thank them. And so users clicking on each of those elements go into an interactive video where the coach will explain the core principles of each step and will help them be successful in applying them. Once learners have gone through these didactic elements, they really get to dive in the conversation with the patient or the client and have a variety of tools at their disposal to do that. You can first see in the middle top of your screen the talk menu. The talk menu is the key part of the simulation. This is where you are going to be able to choose what to say to the virtual character. So we'll come back to that in a second. Then on the right, you can see thought bubbles, a very cool feature where you are actually privy to what the patient is thinking at any given time. The instructional objective here is to develop the learner's emotional intelligence and their ability to predict what a patient might be thinking or feeling at any given time. So we give a variety of ways in which the user can interpret what is going on, and the thought bubbles are one of them. At the bottom, engage the patient is, how well you're using motivational interviewing and the brief negotiated interview format to engage the patient in the conversation and motivate them to implement positive changes. On the left of that, you can see the BI checklist. The brief intervention checklist reveals the 6-step brief negotiated interview model and helps remind users which step they are on at any given point of the conversation and what their goals are in that section of the conversation. And finally, a key part of this interface is the undo button, which, as I mentioned earlier, allows learners to undo what they have just said if they don't like the virtual patient's reaction. So the virtual patient reacts negatively to something they said. The virtual patient might be thinking negative thoughts and might be angry at the provider. You see the engagement meter go down. You do have the option of clicking the undo button and trying out a different technique. So this is a very key feature of this simulation in terms of affording you things that you can do in real life, really, and having that comfort of being able to go back. Once you click the talk button, you can see a variety of options revealed on your screen. We have the option of discussing confidentiality, or discussing substance use with the patient, or providing feedback. And in each of those, we can choose a more effective or a neutral or a less effective option. So for example, in discussing substance use with Emily, you can ask her, how does being distracted in class relate to your marijuana use? Or we can ask a more open-ended question about, can you tell me more about your weekly use of marijuana? So these choices are developed during our development process in collaboration with subject matter experts and with motivational interviewing experts and trainers who help us develop a variety of ineffective, neutral, and effective techniques that the user is presented with. And so each user, after learning about motivational interviewing and the brief negotiated interview model, each learner is challenged to implement those techniques in this conversation with the patient. When they choose effective choices, they will see the engagement meter go up. They will see the patient open up and provide a lot of information and engage in the conversation. And conversely, taking a less effective choice, being directive or abrupt with the patient, will make them recoil, will make the engagement meter go down, and occasionally the virtual coach may even force you to go back in time and undo your choice if what you said is really so bad that it cannot be repaired in a way. So these practice conversations take place several times throughout the simulations. You first speak with Josh in a hospital ED setting, where Josh presents with an ankle ligament injury, and his a patient file reveals that he jumped off a roof while he was at a party into a hot tub trying to impress his friends, and that his use of alcohol may have been related to his injury. And so once his ankle is taken care of, you as the nurse or the social worker engaging in this conversation you can practice using those techniques to effect change in Josh's behavior. You can then speak with Emily, as we just saw in a school nurse or social worker's office, where Emily is referred by her teacher because she has been paying a little less attention in class and has been distracted. And so you will be able to speak with Emily about her weekly use of marijuana indicated in her screening results. This is a conversation I really like, partly because it brings in some of the emotional or life components of the teenager's substance use. It brings in some considerations of her family life and Emily's parents' divorce, which help put some context behind her substance use and eventually help her implement changes. Finally, in an assessment conversation, you speak with Kayla in a primary care context, where Kayla presents for her annual well visit. So there is no presenting complaint that we can relate to substance use. Kayla seems to be doing fine, and we've known her for several years, and shows moderate risk or weekly use of alcohol in our screening form. And so we'll have to talk with her about that and bring it up in a sensitive way. You can see that some of the features in this conversation are that you will receive a score at the end. And that total score is broken down between the brief intervention adherence score, which rates how well you stuck to the brief negotiated interview format. And you will also receive a motivational adherence score, which rates the way in which you used motivational interviewing techniques in going through the conversation. And in this conversation, you will have no undo button, no engagement meter, and no access to inner thought. So you're really, so your training wheels have been taken off, and you're really placed in an assessment condition where you will receive a score at the end. So this is very useful for faculty, for example, who want to assess their student skills, or implementers who want to assess their staff competency in conducting screening and brief intervention. And here's the dashboard that users receive at the end of the conversation, where they can see their overall score out of 100 and a brief commentary about their performance. They can also see their motivational style rated out of 5, as well as Kayla's engagement level. The dashboard also includes a full breakdown of the conversation, structured according to the brief negotiated interview model, and breaks down what you did well or less well in the conversation, and how many points you accrued in each section. At the end of this dashboard, there are also a couple of prompts to receive additional education on those areas where there's room for improvement, and that will allow users to go back to the relevant module to practice and try to up their score a little bit. So this dashboard is very useful in terms of communicating to users and to the program administrators where there might be room for improvement. If you're implementing SBIRT in a hospital, for example, or a primary care network, this can be really useful in terms of figuring out where is my staff or where are my students going wrong? Is it about building rapport with the patient? Is it about providing feedback to them about their substance use? So this will be really helpful to see where the skill gaps might be. Also for administrators, you will receive access to a full usage report. So we provide an administrator platform online that is accessible 24/7, and where program administrators can log on and download either top-level reports or user-by-user reports that will show you exactly who accessed the simulation and when, what are their demographics and their role and the setting in which they practice, as well as information about how they did in the simulation. Did they complete it? Did they receive continuing education credit? Their scoring information, and so on and so forth. So if you are conducting any research about your implementation of SBIRT or about these training tools, this is a very, very useful tool in terms of data collection. And here's a screenshot of what the report looks like. This is the summary view that will show you the kind of bird's eye view of your user pool, and then the user level data will show you each user's access and performance. So to conclude, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact so far of this program and this simulation. Together with NORC and the Hilton Foundation and the other partners on the project, we are deploying this simulation in over 60 schools of nursing and social work and other health professions actually that have been brought into the project, often in collaboration with the nursing and social work schools. We are also conducting a randomized control trial where we are really trying to test the effectiveness of the simulation versus sort of pen and paper instruction to try and figure out, well, what is the added value of the simulation in terms of the skills that students and practitioners walk away with. We are also working with many SAMHSA grantees who are both institutions of higher education and state implementers who are implementing SBIRT within their state. In the schools, this involves, as I mentioned, departments of nursing, social work, pharmacy, physician assistant, psychology, many professions supported by SAMHSA to implement substance use SBIRT education in their programs, as well as primary care networks, hospitals, professional associations, trying to bring quality content to their members. So this has been very widely used so far, including actually in the university hospitals and the field placement sites attached to those university programs where the simulations are implemented. And finally, we are supporting research and development, as I mentioned, through extensive survey data collection and providing access to that data to clients and researchers. We're also working within government-funded research to provide simulations to researchers that want to test certain interventions within their R01 funded studies by NIDA or NIAAA and so on. And we also do that by providing scores and simulation data, so we have the ability to see exactly how people are behaving within the simulation, what are they clicking on, and what difference does that make. This also allows us to continuously improve these simulations by figuring out where people might be encountering difficulties, what content might need to be beefed up or reinforced throughout the simulation. Just to talk a little bit about the user feedback that we have received so far, these are a few quotes from some of our implementers in schools of health professions, but it's quite representative of the feedback we've received so far from across implementation sites. The first is that users have found that the most significant part of the simulation was how it breaks down the steps in the conversation with Kayla and the other patients to help effect change, and how these steps have shown to the students how to be much more effective than simply being directive and telling patients what to do. So students are getting the main learning objectives of the simulation. We are seeing the effects of therapeutic communication. Again, a great benefit of the simulation is that they can actually see how a patient reacts to the way they communicate with them, and the way a patient might walk away from an appointment choosing to make a change, which is a very considerable change from other training tools, first of all, where you are not able to engage in practice with the patient and see how they respond. So this is very powerful to the student. In instructional terms, we call this situated learning, really putting students in the setting in which they are going to apply their skills, putting them in a realistic situation, and seeing how the patient reacts really gives them the best feedback they can get about how well they're doing. And students indeed are saying that they like that if they use the wrong strategies, the patient would react realistically. So these patients, the virtual patients, are really designed to reflect real patients, and we again talk a lot with subject matter experts and practitioners in the fields to understand what are patients saying, how do they behave with you in those conversations, how might they react to this thing that you might say or this other thing that you might say. And overall, students have been, or users in general, have been finding it a very fulfilling use of time. We see over 95% of our users recommending these simulations to their peers. So again, a very engaging experience that students walk away from feeling pleased and having better skills and comfort in conducting screening and brief intervention. Where to next? We've been talking a lot to implementers, with end users, with trainers out there, program administrators, to figure out what do they want to see and where can they see this technology being applied. A great thing that we've heard is that this simulation really applies equally well to novice learners of SBI as well as to veteran practitioners. In fact, during our development process, we did see that many experienced professionals and faculty members did make mistakes and did benefit from the experience of gaining additional practice. Additionally, we are talking about creating, however, we would like to create additional levels of difficulty, again, to ensure that users in different settings and different levels of ability are able to get the most out of these simulations. Similarly, we would like to create additional patient profiles. The patients can vary greatly, as you know, in their personality and their substance use, and so providing greater variety lot of activity, and with military settings increasingly implementing screening and brief intervention for alcohol and other substances, there is more and more urgency to address military populations. As well as SBIRT on college campuses, Cognito has worked on mental health and suicide prevention initiatives with many colleges, over 400 nationwide to date. And so we would love to take our experience in working with college campuses and student health and wellness to the field of SBIRT. And finally, other substances such as opioids, which we are all aware that there is an incredible crisis going on and a lot of activity, a lot of professionals trying to address this crisis, and also additional topics like screening and brief intervention for mental health, or using similar intervention tools for suicide prevention. So I will leave it here. You have my contact information on the screen. We do have time for questions and answers. I'll be happy to answer as best I can, and I will hand it back over to Sarah and the IRETA team for the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cyril. That was an excellent presentation. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, but I do want to remind our audience that they can submit any questions that they have to the questions box. So the first question is there a similar program for adults?
Yes, there is. We do offer a couple of different simulations for adults. A couple of years ago, we developed a very similar simulation that helps address mental health and substance use with patients in a context. Skills like motivational interviewing and how to structure the screening and the brief intervention conversation with patients around those topics of substance use and mental health, including a conversation with a military veteran about opioids. And this conversation includes an assessment of his risk of substance abuse and eventually a conversation around alternative methods for pain management. We also have a second simulation called SBI Skills Assessment, which is designed as a booster and assessment module. It's a brief 20-minute conversation that helps learners essentially assess their competency in conducting a brief negotiated interview with an adult patient for alcohol use.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cyril. Our next question is, what is the estimated cost per staff report or by organization? And could you speak to some of the other costs that might be associated with this?
Sure. Cost largely depends on the scale of your implementation and how many simulations you would be using. But as a, just to give you a number, for schools of health professions, for example, we are implementing these simulations at a cost of $40 per student per semester. So think of this as the cost of a textbook that would be assigned to the students for their course. And in fact, in some institutions that we are collaborating with, they are making the simulations available through the bookstore and actually asking the students to pay those fees. Now, having said all that, for schools that are training several hundred students each year in SBIRT, that when we get to that volume of, or to that scale of implementation, institutional licensing is available, so that per user cost is considerably reduced. There are no additional costs for these simulations. We do offer additional data collection and reporting services, which I would be happy to provide more information about.
Okay, thank you. And we can share any information you'd like with the attendees following today's webinar. Could you also talk about different continuing education options that are available going through the simulations?
Yes, absolutely. So this simulation, SBI with Adolescents, is currently accredited for 2 CNE credits for nurses, which are accredited through AMCC and are recognized nationally. And the simulation also carries 2 credits, 2 NASW credits, so from the National Association of Social Workers for social work professionals. And the simulation has also been approved for continuing medical education, and accreditation is pending. And if there are folks on this call who would like to suggest additional certifications, if you think that this is a great fit for a particular type of professionals and you would like to see it accredited for them, please get in touch and we'll get working on that.
Thank you, Cyril. I can tell you that one of our attendees has noted that they'd like to see CEs available for counselors and alcohol and drug counselors, potentially through NADAC or NCC.
That's a wonderful suggestion, and I'll be glad to talk to NADAC about that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for a great presentation, and thank you to all of our attendees for your participation today. I'd just like to go over a couple of housekeeping items here at the end. Cyril, I'm going to go ahead and take the screen back from you.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
So at this time, I'd just like to go over a couple of evaluation and CEU instructions. Now you're going to receive a few emails from us following today's webinar, and in these emails will be a link to a recording of the webinar as well as a PDF version of today's slides. Also included in the email will be a link to our evaluation. Now at the end of the evaluation will be a CEU request page. You can request a free certificate of attendance, a 1 credit PACADC credit, or a 1 credit NADAC credit. All of your certificates are available for download in your My IRETA profile page. Now when you get to that request page, it'll direct you to a link to make a free purchase of either a NADAC or PCB credit. Once you complete your order, you'll want to go return to your user profile page where you'll find your certificates available for download. Now if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us at info@IRETA, and we'd be happy to walk you through the certificate download process. And if you have any other questions for Cyril, please feel free to email us and then we will connect you. So again, we want to thank everyone for their participation today, and thank you, Cyril, for a great presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sarah.